I'm Liz Shaw, and I'm so excited to be here today with Kim Rose to talk about what we can do in today's climate. So, the topic of our discussion today is going to be what we can do to help change the vast racial disparities we have in the dietetic profession. And I know that I myself am looking for things to do, and we're hearing from one side, of what we see on social media to do our own work, do our own homework, and try and do these things on our own. And then we're doing our homework, but we're not sure if we're doing the right things for our colleagues and our friends that we care so much about. So I'm so grateful that Kim reached out to me to have this open discussion and kind of just an unfiltered, raw discussion that we can just be vulnerable and talk and just really share the knowledge that Kim has to help educate us as Caucasians in the profession, and really make sure that we're amplifying Black voices, because it's so true that we need more diversity in our profession. We can have this discussion. So I'm going to let Kim talk a little bit about herself and what led her to become a dietitian, because I think that those stories are so fun.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you again so much, Liz. So I just want to let you guys know two things. I'm originally from Jamaica, so if you hear a slight accent, that's what you're hearing. And additionally, I'm so happy that Liz agreed to do this with me because, I think, it is our responsibility as dietetic practitioners. I always tell everyone who speaks to me, we have to elevate the profession. And how can we elevate the profession if we're not unified? So just a little bit about me, my history. So I was born in Jamaica. I like to say I'm Jamaican American because I came here when I was 5 years old. So of course, cultural appropriation took place. But because I grew up in a traditional Jamaican household, traditional foods, traditional way of thinking, I was always told you're going to be a nurse, a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or physical therapist. So fast forwarding, when I actually started doing my undergraduate, I was going towards becoming a physical therapist when a family member of mine said, Kim, why don't you look into dietetics? And I'm like, what? Like, what is that? So I decided to double major. I had my exercise science major and I had my physical therapy major. And not physical therapy, excuse me, my food and nutrition major. So I realized that there was a stark difference in who I was seeing in the classes. Like in my exercise science, there was a lot of men, there was a lot of diversity, there was a lot of women. But in my food and nutrition classes, specifically my disease and nutrition class, that's the class that automatically comes to mind, I was the only Black girl. And, everything you say here, let me preface, everything that you hear here is from my personal viewpoint, because of course, there's diversity in thought in among Black people. So, I said to myself, like, wow, what's going on? So I spoke to my DPD director and I was letting her know, well, I'm not sure if I'm really feeling dietetics. Maybe I should just, be a physical therapist. And she was like, Kim, are you kidding me? You're Black. And I'm just like, well, what does that have to do with anything? And I didn't understand what she was speaking about at the time because I didn't know the statistics. So after I graduated, I was really torn still. I was like, should I do physical therapy or should I do dietetics? So I decided I was going to take a year off of applying to anything and just serve an underserved community. So I moved to Alabama from sunny South Florida to serve the Mexican population for a year. So I delved myself in their community. They taught me how to cook their foods. And I gave them the smallest tips that I remembered from undergrad, such as, decreasing the amount of lard that they cook with and increasing their intake of non-starchy vegetables. And next thing you know, like they're telling their friends about, this girl that's in the community and giving all these little health lectures at the YMCA. And I was like, oh, wow, this is making a difference, because when they would go back to their doctor, blood pressure was lower. Some of the women were losing weight. So that's where I really found my passion. That's where I really found it. So I applied to the VA internship with Dr. Amy Knobloch Hahn. We're still very close today. And that was over a decade ago. So I'm giving away my age, guys. I look young, but I'm giving away my age. But the focus of that internship was health disparities and working with the Mexican American population really allowed me to see the disparities that were in the community. So that's why I applied. And just to make a long story short, to this day, I'm still really realizing that we're making strides, we're making moves, but we still have a long way to go in the profession. We do, to not only increase diversity amongst ourselves, but also to be culturally sensitive for the patients and clients we serve.
Absolutely. And I loved reading that on your website too about your history and that you were from Jamaica. And just like I thought that was so cool. I mean, one of the things that I've been learning and like obviously educating with myself is don't necessarily refer to someone as African American. It's refer to someone if they're of color as Black, because people are from so many different regions.
Right.
And so I thought that was a really, just tool for my toolbox, like to help expand, like, well, that was really cool to learn about that, Kim. I'll give a brief intro of myself. So I've been a dietitian for over a decade as well. I have always wanted to be an RD. So when I was 13 years old, I was diagnosed with anorexia. And so during that treatment time, I saw a dietitian, a therapist, the doctors, the whole multidisciplinary team. And at that moment with working with the dietitian, I knew that's what I wanted to do. Like if she was coaching me on how to understand how food is more than just calories, it's fuel for your body, it's socialization, it's all of these things. So I knew when I was a freshman going into high school that I was going to graduate, I was going to find a program that had a DPD. I knew that the RD path, so it was great that when I still finished high school, I still wanted to do that. So I did end up taking about 6 months off between graduating my undergrad and then applying for internships, just because I knew I needed more work experience. I worked in a gym and I did that kind of things. I worked a lot of catering. So I've worked catering for over 15 years. It was, food service. I love food service. I think it's maybe what drives me into food more, but I swear the culinary techniques I learned from the chefs that I worked with that were American Culinary Federation trained chefs, like it was just so fun, and so that passion really helped me know I wanted to go back to school and finish or apply for my RD credential and then get my master's as well. So when I ended up getting into Illinois and I went to just outside of Chicago, and I did my RD credential and then a specialization program in eating disorders and obesity. So I got to work a lot with the clientele that was struggling with not only anorexia nervosa, bulimia, orthorexia, but really binge eating disorder, because that was right when the diagnostic criteria was starting to change. And we were looking at eating disorders not otherwise specified and looking at some of these other terms. So to be a student at that time and working with some of the researchers in the field was really, really exciting, because it just helped me look at food for so many different reasons, and like when we look at obesity, someone isn't necessarily struggling with obesity because they're eating too much food. We know that there's so many detriments to health, whether someone's in a zone that they can't get access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And so they're relying on the one food that they can get. And so working with the researcher and going through this program, she actually was from Alabama. So she did all of her main research in Alabama, and she would share examples from the studies of these populations that were so underserved. And I remember thinking, like, that was starting like the conversation on HAES and changing how we view things, because, I truly believe there's so much more to health, obviously, than a number on the scale, on the numbers that we see out there. Sure, we know that lipid levels and things like that. So it really opened me at that time in my career to understand that, it's not a one size fits all approach to nutrition. And if we're going to be change agents in this field, we have to understand everyone needs specific interventions for their particular lifestyle and their messaging,
Exactly. I agree. I totally agree.
And I love that your philosophy, I know when you reached out, it was like, our philosophies match so well that we're just, let's make nutrition as simple as we can. Let's make it accessible. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into this conversation today.
Sure.
So Kim and I discussed some questions that we're gonna kind of just do a Q&A, and at the end, I asked Kim a few personal questions to share with us about some organizations, because I know some of us are like, where can we donate? What can we do? So we're kind of gonna go through all of these. So first off, Kim, is food a good lens for us to examine racial issues? Why or why not?
So that is a great question. And I would say yes, yes, it is. So just first, just looking at food, you know, the Queen of England has to eat, the presidents of different countries have to eat, you and I have to eat. So that's what we all share in common. We have to eat because that's what our cells need to repair, for growth, for just basically maintenance of the body. So looking at food on a different perspective now, because that's what joins us together. I always like to tell people that food is bipartisan, not that it's Democrat or Republican, but that's what we all have to do. That's what we all share in common. But when we look at food through a racial perspective, I'm not speaking about the difference between brown rice or white rice, but food does have some racial connotations. And I think it's because of crafty marketing. I saw a couple weeks ago, you know, when the whole entire Black Lives Matter, people of color movement started, that Uncle Ben's Rice, came out and they were saying, you know, after having that marketing, you know, the blackmail on the package of rice since the 1940s, that they were going to change things. So then, you know, I'm a curious person. I'm like, okay, well, what's the history? So I found out that Ben was an actual person, and he was a Black farmer, and he was known in his region for producing really good quality rice. So there was someone from Texas, a food broker, that came and decided to, you know, market it. And he said in his marketing that this rice was nutritive, you know, that it was the quality rice that Uncle Ben made. And, you know, to add, in my opinion, and I'm going to explain why, to add insult to injury, he put a face of a Black man on the package and called it Uncle Ben. So, you know, I know a lot of people may be thinking, okay, Kim, you know, where's the insult? Where's the injury? So the insult and the injury, Black people, older Black people, whether they were male or female, back in the 1940s when Uncle Ben's rice came out, they were called uncle and aunt. They weren't called Mr. and Mrs. because it was not appropriate for a white person to call them Mr. and Mrs. And I mean, we also see this in, you know, Aunt Jemima and her pancake syrup. We also see this in Miss Chiquita. You remember Chiquita bananas?
Yes.
I remember when I was smaller, I always used to watch the commercials, and I loved to see Miss Chiquita come out with her yellow dress and the banana hat, and she was dancing. So Miss Chiquita, it had racial, it was more of an unconscious racial bias towards Hispanic women, you know, that they were sensual, that they liked to dance and show off their physique. So even though it may be innocent, there are built-in social constructs that really show racism in the food industry as well. So it's deep. It is so deep.
You know, I'm so glad you brought that up because I didn't know that about uncle and aunt, about that, you know, that point. But I was reading an article that talked about the Aunt Jemima and how it was a great grandson. It was someone in the line, the lineage that knew Aunt Jemima, and he was actually offended that they were going to kind of change the Aunt Jemima feel and, you know, to make sure that it was more politically correct in this landscape now. And it was just interesting to see that because he's like, this is part of my heritage. This is part of, you know, this is what my, I can't remember who directly in the line, but it was such an interesting article because I'm like, you know, everyone, as you said before, like, this is how you feel, you know, and your feelings, you know, and just how we have to be so sensitive because everyone has their own, you know, have their own feelings. Everyone's their own being.
Exactly. Exactly. I agree.
That's a really good teachable moment. Okay, that's I'm wow, I'm blown away. Okay, Kim, can you compare and contrast food deserts, food swamps, food apartheids, and food mirages?
Sure. So I actually have the definitions written down because, of course, I wouldn't do justice summarizing it. So if you see me looking to the side, that's what I'm looking at. So let's first start off with food swamps. So food swamp is a place where unhealthy foods are more readily available than healthy foods. So basically think of the calorie dense foods. You have sodas and you have chips that are more readily available than the produce, which is more nutrient dense. A food desert is an area that has limited access to healthy and nutritious foods. A food apartheid, this is actually my favorite definition, it takes into consideration a food desert, but it touches upon the point that certain grocery stores are located in certain zip codes because of socioeconomic status. And I'm not going to call any names here, but think of certain markets that are popular within our dietitian community. They are within certain zip codes. And I know for me, I live in a food apartheid, and I actually have to travel an hour to go to a grocery store that sells the everything that I'm looking for because of where I'm located. And then a food mirage is there are nutritious foods nearby, but they are not in the reach of everyone. They're only in the reach of certain individuals. So when you take all these definitions into consideration, they all share the same thing, that there is a food inequality going on, that there is food injustice going on. But to contrast them, they show the different degrees on which in access to food is layered. So it's more systemic more than anything.
When you sent this question over, I didn't recognize. I'm so familiar with the term we call in San Diego when we talk about different zip codes, basically, that don't have the access to healthy foods. We say food deserts, so frequently. And then Kim has a great podcast that she actually just talked a lot about this on. I was listening to that the other day after you sent this, because I was like, I need to do my homework. I didn't realize, so many different definitions, because I think, most of the role I do in my work is like a media RD. So I work a lot with different brands, and I do a lot of consulting on the back end. And I think for people who are in positions where they work directly with grocery stores, representing them, like, what can we do? I mean, do you have any advice that we can do? Like, go back to our contacts at these grocery stores, and is there anything we could do, like, to help change the access? I mean, where does that start?
Oh my goodness. So it actually starts at the individual, because individuals make up communities, communities make up institutions and organizations. So I think really at the community level, I've been looking at, what I can do in my community. And there are something my church did. I found it very interesting. They had me involved in like a diabetes health talk. And they invited some of the local farmers, because I was sharing with Liz off air that, I live, with cow pastures and orange groves and blueberry farms. So they invited people from the community that were in the apartheid portion of the community. They had them sit down for lectures on health and diabetes. And then afterward, they gave them vouchers. And the farmers came with their trucks and were able to redeem the voucher to get the produce. Another thing that comes to my mind is a community garden. There is a dietitian in my community. She's also active on Instagram, Eat Well Exchange, and she recently started a community garden. So that is something as well that, individuals from the community can grow their own crops, because, when I went to the grocery store the other day, I was looking at the price of cherries, and I hear this all the time from my clients and my patients, mostly my patients at the hospital. The price of cherries now is currently like $3.99 a pound, but I saw it for like $9.99, $7.99. And they tell me, it's more to prevent hunger for them. It's more cost effective for them to buy bread, whatever meat is on sale, and cheese, because that satisfies their hunger, versus buying cherries, which are not as stable. They have the potential to go quick, go moldy, well, if that's not a word, go moldy quickly. So, just basically allowing, food to be within the reach, or nutritious produce to be within the reach of these populations. Those are immediately the first two things that come to mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this also leads into the big discussion when we see, the organic versus conventional debate out there. And it's such a big one, obviously very heated in our profession. And I always say I'm an equal opportunity produce pusher. Like, buy what you can. Please just eat the produce, and I understand what you're saying, like from like a food safety or a food shelf life, aspect that, fresh produce is, but that I always feel like, again, it's obviously access issues too, but like, can we encourage canned, can we do those kind of things? And I feel like there's such a gap in our profession with this, that we either take a one way or the highway kind of stance instead of just saying all fruits and vegetables are good. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. Exactly. And I think, of course, it's going to differ by different regions. I think also something that I face as well, even when I say, well, go ahead and buy the canned, I've had single mothers tell me, well, is that going to feed me and my children versus I have bread and I have butter and they eat it and they go to bed and their bellies are filled and they're not crying and telling me, mommy, I'm hungry. So I think for them, it's more of a calorie dense perspective instead of a nutrient dense perspective. So of course, hey, get all the macros to satisfy that hunger. I like to think of, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, first is shelter, then food, before you actually get to self actualization and love. So get your macros, I understand. But at the same time, here is a voucher, here is a free resource for you so that you don't have to, because, they're paying rent, they have gas, children are growing. So, you have baby H, I like to call her baby H. They're growing quickly, so they need clothes. So I think it's a macro instead of a micronutrient concern for them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's a good point. And a good, I know we'll get into this. I could ask a million questions, but I'm going to go to the next one and I'll ask this one when we get to it. What are some of the health and wellness concerns for communities of color? And do these concerns obviously vary depending on age?
Sure, that's a great question. So I think something that I didn't share in my intro is that I'm a clinical dietitian, certified diabetes education specialist, and a certified nutrition support clinician. So in my brain, the first thing that comes to mind when you ask this question is I'm thinking of, there's diabetes, things that I have seen. There is hyperlipidemia, there is hypertension, and there is gross obesity. So the first thing that comes to my mind in relation to the health concern is number one, and it's going to be so hard to change because of the way that the system is, but let's talk about the BMI, the body mass index. So the BMI was actually created by a white male, and he tested the height weight proportion of other white males to establish the BMI. So it doesn't take into consideration the physiological differences and the genotypical differences of women and men of color. White women, black men, it doesn't take that into consideration at all. So the BMI cannot, in my opinion, be easily dispersed throughout all populations. The problem is in the hospital setting where I work, speaking with my coders, Kim, can you document this BMI for reimbursement issues? Maybe I even shouldn't say that, but I'm being honest, guys.
Yeah, I've all heard it in some capacity when we've been in some kind of clinical setting that it's an insurance. Half the time it's an insurance billing type of issue.
Yes, exactly. And that shows me that our healthcare system within the United States is built, it's not culturally sensitive because they're using that BMI. I have seen, there in literature that, Asian people use a different BMI because their stature is just different. So why can't we have a BMI that is different for different frames, different genders, different genotypes? I guess it would be too complicated for the reimbursement.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought this up because in the private practice I do see clients struggling with fertility. And so 9 times out of 10, they're being told by their doctor if they're of a heavier BMI that they need to lose weight. And I'm like, hold the phone.
Yeah.
You gotta address where BMI came from. And it's the same thing. People don't get that it's these white males who came up with these numbers, not applicable to 99% of the population.
Exactly. So I think one of the ways to address this is knowledge, having that knowledge there, sharing that knowledge, with your clients that, it's not a one size fits all kind of ordeal. And, with that knowledge also comes a lot of consequences because, like, for instance, take the Tuskegee experiment. So for those of you who are watching this and don't know what the Tuskegee experiment is, it was an experiment in the 1930s, I think it was 1930s, where Black men were intentionally injected with syphilis, and the government just wanted to study, well, okay, what happens to the body? What happens to the brain? And these men passed syphilis to their wives and to their children until like years later, the government decided to stop it because they realized it was unethical. So there may be that stigma within communities of color, like, oh my gosh, like if the government is doing that to us, like what are they doing now? Another thing I think as well is lack of representation. So, you know, we all know there's been various literatures that people are more comfortable with people that look like them, that act like them, you know, identify with them. But that's not to say, you know, if we look differently, that we cannot still be effective. We just have to be a little more culturally sensitive and a little more culturally competent, which is not something static. It's ever evolving, ever changing. So I think the real thing is, you know, for providers like you and I, Liz, to be an advocate for our patients, so that our patients can know, like, hey, I'm going through this with you. I'm in the thick of things with you. And, you know, if you do not feel comfortable using your voice, I'm going to use my voice for you. Like there have been clients that have been diagnosed with diabetes, and I ask them, you know, what medications are you on? And they tell me they don't know. So, okay, we're going to have a little talk. Let me empower you and tell you why you need to know. There's a client that said to me, you know, I'm on Lasix and I'm on furosemide. And I'm like, those are the same thing. Let me, you know, I'm not a pharmacist, but let's get the pharmacist over here and let me have, you know, so you're setting them up with individuals that are able to help them, empowering them to see like, oh, okay, all I have to do is ask questions. And that's how we can be agents of change.
Oh, I couldn't agree with that more. I think that empowering, I call it patient advocacy. I did a post yesterday on this on my fertility channel about why we have to advocate for ourselves, because sometimes it's as simple as, you know, a textbook approach from physicians. They just see us as a number, another number coming into the
Yes.
room, you know? And I know, I mean, I know from the research and from talking to colleagues that, you know, women of color that go into these offices for, especially for fertility treatment, are even more at a disadvantage from getting the right answers to their questions and getting what they need. So it's I love that you said that's our job. That's our job, that we can be powerful advocates for them.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so kind of talking about that. When we talk about weight and lifestyle interventions that are cited in the literature for people of color, what can we do to, you know, discuss behavior modifications, lifestyle modifications that don't revolve around a scale, that don't revolve around this number that we're hearing so frequently about?
Oh, that is a very great question, Liz. So because even though I'm a clinical dietitian in a hospital setting, I do have a little side hustle in my private practice. And I do get a lot of patients that want to lose weight. You know, their doctor said, you know, let's lose weight. So within the first month of meeting them, you know, I'm with them. I don't discuss weight whatsoever. I ask them about their sleeping patterns. I ask them about the stress factors in their lifestyle. I ask them about, are they secure with food? So I think taking the number off of the scale, because weight is not just associated with the foods you're eating. It's associated with, oh my gosh, what's going on in your life? You know, are you able to manage the stress? Are you able to rest and rejuvenate your body instead of your body kicking out all these fight and flight hormones that impact what the scale can show? So I think, you know, moving away from the scale, moving away from the number, you know, you're dealing with, even though we're not mental health professionals, we need to deal with the whole person, not just like we are three-dimensional. I always tell people we're three-dimensional. I hope I don't offend anyone, but we are mental, we are physical, and we are spiritual beings. So we need to deal with people from a holistic standpoint, not just a physical person, or, you know, that medical records number, or like the patient ID number. So I think focusing more on what is going on in your life and are you able to get control of these issues? And then when that is all together, let's focus on nutrient dense foods, or, you know, whatever the issue may be.
Now, I think that's a great point. And I think that, you know, you so often don't want someone else wearing our hat as dietitians, because, you know, we worked hard, we worked our asses off to get our degrees, you know, but how do you, especially in communities that don't have access, that don't have funding to go see a therapist or go get outside treatment, how do you make sure that you don't cross lines. Because I know that obviously, like, all of us wear a therapist hat in some capacity, or
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
counselor, we'll call it a coach, whatever we want to call it. How do you ensure that you don't cross lines to, you know, being a therapist versus being more of their nutrition coach, you know?
Right. So that's where building relationship comes from in regards to other providers. I have a good friend of mine and he's a mental health therapist. So I say, Matt, you know, this person really needs to see you. Can this be your pro bono? Because I mean, just really having, you know, another provider that is willing to give back and see the importance of it, and you're referring clients to them, they're referring clients to you. But once you explain the financial status, then they're like, yeah, you know, I'm currently accepting one pro bono this month and I'm not opening up again. So just having that in your practice, because yes, as dietitians, we need to eat, we need to pay bills, but realize that there are some communities that aren't really able to do that. And something else that I did want to address, Liz, because I know, you know, you have your fertility practice, and Black women, of course, you said, you know, they may be marginalized with the information that they give. There is this great person I found on Instagram. Her name is Dr. Shannon. I forget her last name. I just call her Dr. Shannon. She's going to be on my podcast. I'm excited. Her name is Babies After 35, and she actually had a Black fertility specialist, OBGYN, on her Instagram live. And she was just giving all this information. She was like, Black women or women of color, if you don't have insurance, there's grants out there that are available for you. There's support groups. And she was just encouraging everyone to join this organization called Fertility for Black Girls, where it tells you like everything that you need to know. These are the questions that you need to ask. Also realize that as providers, our clients, our patients don't work for us. We work for them. Just, you know, having a little vulnerable moment right now. I remember I was having some menstrual issues, like really bad, ended up in the ER, don't know what's going on. Went to my OBGYN. She just wanted to put me on a pill. And I'm like, no, I need to know what's going on. So I went to another OBGYN and, you know, she did all the diagnostics, did all the workups, wanted to put me on a pill. I'm like, no. You told me this is an endocrine issue. You need to send me to an endocrinologist. Went to my endocrinologist, who then referred me to a neurologist. They found that I had a benign tumor.
Adenoma? Yeah.
Yes, adenoma, thank you. That is affecting my whole entire baby box. So I'm like, I call it my baby box. So I'm like, okay, this is what I'm looking for. So realizing that providers work for us. And it basically took me 1, 2, 3, 4, skipping around because I wasn't pleased with the answer. I'm like, I don't want a pill, I want the answer. What's the cause? Why is this occurring? And after I got my answer, then I said, yes, you can put me on what you want to put me on, but know that I'm going to be asking these questions.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, so what are some real life strategies dietitians can use to help reduce health and wellness disparities?
Okay, so I'm going to, seeing that this question is specific for our profession, I'm going to start with the majority. So currently in the field of dietetics, we have a little over 104,000 dietitians within the United States. And 80%, I wouldn't say 81, but 80% are Caucasian women. So, and 20% are people of color. So let's first start off with the majority. We do live in a democratic world. Well, United States is democratic. I don't know about the world, but we do live in a democracy. So I think the first thing that needs to, in my opinion, be done is to recognize white fragility. So white fragility is a term that says I wouldn't say it's a term for everyone, but Caucasian people, white people, sometimes when there's issues of racism that are brought up, they have this fear and guilt and defensiveness and anger about it because they live in an entirely different social construct. There is an environmental difference, an economic difference, a social difference. So they sometimes may not understand what is really going on with individuals of color. So the first thing is to examine white fragility. Examine if you have the white fragility. And to some degree, we all have some implicit and then some unconscious bias. And I think a tool that will be helpful is Harvard has a test, an implicit and unconscious bias test, and it lists out different things like, are you Black versus white people? What's your preference? Fat versus thin people? What's your preference? And there's like a whole slew of these different tests that you can take to see where you're biased. So I would definitely recommend taking that first. The second thing that can be done is after you identify white fragility, see within your circle of influence if there is a family member or a friend or a neighbor that may be experiencing white fragility as well. And the reason why I say that is because at times, seeing these things on the news and, speaking to a person of color, your friends or your family members may not understand, why are Black people going so hard on this Black Lives Matter? They just need to leave it to rest. It's over, let it go. What I say to that, it's more than a month. It's more than Black History Month. It's more than National Nutrition Month. It is something 365 days a year. And even though that may seem like, oh my gosh, Kim, that's a very large number. I live in this skin 365 days a year. My neighbors around me are all Caucasian, with the exception of a new neighbor that moved in and they're Hispanic. So when I go for walks in the evening time, because again, Florida, the sun is hot, I'm always having to look behind my back. I hear the knobs turning on the doors. No one is outside, but I hear people and their car alarms. And this is, even though I'm your neighbor, this is what I'm experiencing. This is my 365. So I feel as if in the profession of dietetics, we need to keep this in our forefront 365 days a year. There was a third thing that I actually wrote it down to continue to have these conversations, like the conversations that we're having, Liz, and also to take, be a little more culturally competent. So I know with now, there's a lot of companies, they're including diversity, equity, and inclusion specialists, but that is a good move. Yes, that is a great move. But at the same time, what does your talent acquisition team look like when we're working with brands? What does your C-suite look like in the hospital? What does your board members look like? Do they look like people like me? They're Hispanic? Is it diverse? So, and the reason why I say that is because even though they may be a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist that comes in and you may desire for them to fix issues, what do your staff members really look like? Another thing I think is important as well is to hold brands accountable. Recently, a few brands have reached out to me, and I always have this conversation. I'm like, okay, is this a one-off thing, or is this something that will continue? Or are you trying to be, socially and politically correct because it is trending? It's trending right now. Guys, this is the truth. It's trending right now. So I think, holding brands accountable as well and letting them know, like, this is what I would like to see as an influencer that works with you. And even though, to be open and honest and transparent, if you're going to be an agent of change, it's not all cookies and cream and peaches and cream and roses and lollipops and unicorns. There can be consequences to that as well. Some brands may not want to take you. You may lose money from your pocket. But something that I want dietitians who are listening to this to be aware of is this is the profession. We do not function as individuals. We always say as dietitians that we don't get the notoriety that we deserve, and I think it's because we need to function more as a whole entire unit and advocate for the profession instead of just a segment of the profession.
That's really powerful, and I just want to give you all things and I am becoming more aware of that term because you also had a great podcast that was talking about that too, and how the gentleman that was the therapist mentioned something about the boards. Are you looking at the board of your hospital or the board of these organizations and all you see is white old male with gray hair? How are they making the decisions and how are they doing this? Not to say that but just we need diversity. And I think that, you've given some great tips. Now, I know a lot of my followers that are dietitians are in I'm going to put this influencer world, okay? And so they're constantly being told by their business coaches and things like that, niche down, niche down. So when they're being told to niche down, how can they still, so say their audience is, obviously we know eating disorders affects everyone. We know fertility can affect 1 in 8 people, 1 in 8 couples, miscarriage affects 1 in 4. All of these statistics, like how do we make sure that we're being culturally sensitive in our messaging, even though we're told to niche down? Like, I don't know if I'm making sense, but I feel like that's a question that's going to come up.
Yeah, okay, that is a great question. And let me just address the fertility thing, not the fertility, the eating disorder thing before that evades my mind. I was actually on the NEDA website, and 50% of Black teens experience bulimic behaviors more than their counterparts. So it shows, people have this perception that eating disorder is a white girl problem, but it's not. Someone can have, there goes the BMI, of like 35, which is considered obese, but have an eating disorder. So to address your question about niching down, so when you niche down individuals that may look like you are attracted to you, you're going to see a lot of similarities when you niche down, but that's not to say that you can't continue to educate your audience by hopping on like an Instagram story and be like, hey guys, I was doing some research today, and did you know that this is impacting the Black community? So even though when you niche down, your community may not be diverse, we still are educators. All dietitians, it doesn't matter what realm we work in, we're all educators for our community. Mm-hmm. So at times, if you're speaking about food and nutrition, that's the topic, it's so easy to interweave in there, like, well, did you know that, there's food insecurity, mm-hmm. and, it impacts the community through this, and this manner. So can you imagine that there was a Black teen that was food insecure and they were having like an eating disorder, how disproportionately disadvantaged they are, and their increase for morbidity and mortality is even higher. So that is just an example, just, creatively interweaving what your message is, what your niche is, and bringing out a statistic of a community of color.
That's actually a really great point, that, despite who our audience actually is following us day in and day out, that we are educators still. I love that point right there. One analogy that got to my mind last night when I was thinking about this question is for food bloggers. Okay, so for dietitians who are straight food bloggers.
Yeah.
I always think of this example that I was recently interviewed on was sprinkles. Okay, so we know sprinkles, like you can buy like the $1.99 ones that I buy. I'm not spending $14.99 on a 6-ounce bottle of sprinkles that are made with like, blue dye from wild blueberries. I love wild blueberries, but like I'm not gonna like pay $14.99 when I could pay $1.99 for the same that has maybe FDC 4, 5, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Okay? Blue dye 5, whatever. Like when I think about that messaging, okay, when we're serving as, recipe creators, things like this, and we're being hired by, a sprinkle company. I'm not saying if it's not a product you love, like by all means, absolutely do it. But I think there needs to be some kind of messaging in your feed that talks about like actually what the FDA says about food colorings, don't eat it every day, but is it going to kill you in moderation? No. Like, can I give it to my daughter H? Yeah, she eats, food dye with sprinkles every now and then, it's just, I think that those, like, I think about small things like that if someone was in a lower socioeconomic status and was seeing, this 2-year-old birthday cake and it was made with organic wheat flour and all these fluffy ingredients, that it's like, cool, but also you can make it with a box cakes mix and sprinkles, like, and you're going to be fine,
Exactly. That is a great idea. Yeah, you're right. To make it more accessible across all socioeconomic statuses, instead of the organic and the hand-picked peppermint from Indonesia and things of that nature. No offense to anyone from Indonesia, just saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And don't get me wrong. Like I think that my philosophy of simple swaps has evolved so much since I began, because it is like, let's make it affordable. Let's make it convenient. Everyone's on a budget. Like
Exactly.
Oh, great points, Kim. I have a couple more questions for you. One thing I know for those who are professors out there, so I'm an adjunct professor. I've been an adjunct professor for 7 years, and I teach mainly writing about food and health courses. And I know a lot of the followers that are here that are also professors teach a variety of different nutrition type of courses. So what can we do to make sure that we're incorporating more diversity into our classes? It doesn't, maybe like an umbrella thought, so
Yeah.
that regardless of what we're teaching, we can kind of make sure we're doing our due diligence for future students.
Yeah, I think something that is important is to keep the conversations going. I know for me, when I was in my internship, Dr. Amy Knobloch Hahn, um, she always made us read books on health disparities in different diverse communities of color. And I would always say to myself, okay, what is the point? You know, this has nothing, because, you know, I'm looking for, okay, where's the connection to food? Where's the connection to food? And she didn't tell us until after the assignments near the end of our internship. The reasons why I had you guys read those books is because I wanted to expose you to the life of different people. I wanted to expose you to those that were food insecure. I wanted to expose you to those whose children had to start working from an early age. These things don't happen in third world countries. They're happening right here in the United States of America. So even though, you know, at times, you know, the the environments may not be there, like you can't say, okay, yes, go get experience over there and learn how these people are living. Reading. I remember Mark Twain had a quote, and the quote said that travel is lethal to bigotry, to racism. Don't quote me on it. And I'm going to borrow that quote and say that reading internationally is fatal to racism, to bigotry, to bias as well. So just exposing your mind to the reality, to the biographies of other people. I think that is really important as educators that we continue to do, especially for you, that's, you know, adjunct professor.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and that's actually, you know, maybe that's even something like something small that we can start within the profession. You know, a group, a listserv for professors, like here's exchanges of books and things like that, like, you know, to make sure that we're all kind of doing our part. What would be if you had, let's just do something fun real quick. What is your favorite food?
Oh my gosh, Indian food. I like Indian food.
Okay, awesome. I love the naan bread, so I have
Yes.
that too, you know.
All the carbs, yes.
Yep, some chana masala. I like that too. So if there was one, like, you know, if you were to summarize our discussion today and really just want to empower the people listening today with, you know, your words of wisdom in a nutshell, what would you say to them?
To be honest, I would say examine white fragility. Examine it and begin to deconstruct it. Because once you begin to deconstruct white fragility, you understand, you begin to have an understanding of what is taking place in the world. We're not far removed from you know, there was something that I was watching, and they're still like exchanging slaves from Africa to different parts of Europe. And to be honest with you, we're not far removed from that. This was only a few decades ago. So examine it, and also seek out opportunities, you know, have conversations like these with other dietitians of color to see how you can improve your cultural competency. Because like this is just probably a speckle in the whole entire cake. But again, it opens up conversations, it opens up different trains of thinking to make you more aware of, okay, well, what is really taking place in society and what can I do to, you know, elicit change? Mm-hmm. So the first thing would be just really to examine that, examine the fragility.
I think that's a great point. I think that's something too that obviously it's like you said, it's trending right now, but it's not something that should dissipate at the end of summer. It's something that you're living with 365 days a year. And right. It's something that we need to really change for our future. I mean, I think about for my daughter and what I want to make different for her than what my parents taught me. And not that, you know, and I don't know if this is wrong or right, but I know that so many of my white friends and I have talked about this and said, you know, we grew up learning that all people were good, all people were the same, you know, and like right. So many like this, and not that I fault my parents and, or, you know, but it's like they didn't educate us that we shouldn't right. Make differences, you know, and like, you know, all of those things that we are discussing finally now, you know.
Right. Yeah, I've heard my white friends tell me that as well. That, you know, this is one of my white friends. She's from Canada, and she says, "Oh, we don't have this in Canada." And I'm like, yes, you do. You guys have this in Canada as well. I have family that live in Canada and they're experiencing the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, teaching the child that, yes, all people should be treated the same, but then also making them aware of this is the reality that we're living in.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we all have, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, I really enjoyed the way the Sesame Street Live was kind of presented. I don't know if you saw the.
No, I didn't.
It's on, I think they put it on, it's from PBS, I believe, but they put it on CNN, and it was really, really like important topics for like me to take with my daughter. Like we already had books, and now I've purchased more books that had people of color in them. It just wasn't something, but I wasn't like, oh, this is a Black person. I was just like, oh, this is what she did, because it was like courageous people that turned the world, that changed the world. But I'm like, we need to point out, like the way they phrased it was like, educate on the differences. Like, but like, again, all people are to be treated equally. The same message that our parents ingrained in us, but flipping it further to talk about the embracing of differences, and like really how much racism still exists in society today, and how we have to change it.
Correct. I agree. Well stated. I agree.
Well, thank you, Kim. Okay, so let's wrap up here. Now, first, I know a lot of people want to donate right now, and I feel like that's a good thing. I've heard from mixed, different things I listen to, that people are like, if someone's opening their pocketbook, big damn deal. You should be doing more. Yes, we should be doing more. But for those who can't open their pocketbooks, where would you like to see the money go to?
So seeing that we're both dietitians, I would like to see the money go to a nonprofit called Dietetics. So basically it's a movement of great women, Tamara Melton and Deanna Bellamy, who are trying to just increase diversity within the profession of dietetics. Because food, going back to the first question, you can definitely look through race through the lens of food, because food, it brings us together. We all have that in common. We have to eat. So Dietetics, you can find them on their website or Instagram, diversifieddietetics.com, or just @diversifieddietetics.
Okay, great. And just food for thought for people who are employed and not self-employed out there. Some organizations are actually matching donations to nonprofit Black-run organizations. So I know that was something that was really cool. I learned about recently from my husband's company donating. Where can people find you? I know I've talked a little bit about your podcast. Tell us about your podcast. Tell us about your private practice. Where can people find you online?
Sure. So my podcast is called Nutrition Lifestyles with Kim and Joanne, Johan. And basically we excite conversations about women's health, food, nutrition, and also diversity and equity inclusion issues. So it's basically, Joanne is also a registered dietitian, and she is a mother as well. I'm not a mother, you're a mother. So we have something for everyone there. And especially we address what's going on in the world around us. What are some things that, we need to know about communities of color as they relate to chronic disease states, as they relate to food accessibility, as it relates to mental health. So that is the podcast. I'm on Instagram, Kim Rose Dietitian, YouTube, Kim Rose Dietitian, website, Kim Rose Dietitian, all the same.
Perfect. And she has great resources. Full disclosure, I just found her podcast recently, and so I've been listening to. I take a lot of walks with my daughter, and so we've been listening to them, and it's truly really great information, and really succinct time-wise too. I know sometimes people listen to podcasts and they're always like, "Do I have this much time?" You'll make the time for this, trust me. Well, I'm so grateful, Kim. You reached out, and thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, Liz. Thank you so much for, your willingness to have this conversation. I know some people may be very uncomfortable, but I thank you so much for your willingness. This really means a lot.
Absolutely. So I'm going to drop links, especially to that Harvard study, that the survey that she mentioned, a lot of the other links. I'll put them in the bottom. We're going to share this across multiple platforms. So wherever you catch us, drop a comment and let us know if you have anything else that we can discuss for you. So have a good day.
Bye, everyone.